we have undercover footage of the World Health Organization in their private forum talking about how the confidence level of the physician community worldwide is decreasing. The WHO is trying to decide on a strategy. A marketing campaign was a term that they used. So now when you have to have a marketing strategy to convince the health professionals, those who have been appointed to safeguard our health and our children's health, when you have to have a marketing campaign, you know that there's something that doesn't smell right. The Centers for Disease Control's own data shows that 1% of the population of the planet currently has autism. The current world's population is 7.7 billion. 1% of that is 77 million. According to the CDC's own data, 77 million children and young adults have autism on our planet right now. And the explanation is that autism is a genetic disorder. There is no such thing as a genetic epidemic. In 29 years to go from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 30, there's something wrong. They'll say, well, what about polio? So if you want to look at things like polio, very simply look at polio and then look at the incidence of DDT. Now, most chemical compounds that have been introduced into the global economy, it takes of the dirty dozen, the 12 most toxic substances that are banned across every nation on the planet. Those 12, before they became banned, had been used in global commerce for a minimum of 50 years, most of them for over 70 years before it was determined how dangerous they were. Now, back then, during the smallpox era, there was a chemical called DDT, and DDT is today considered one of those dirty dozen. Nobody uses it. It's considered toxic and it's considered banned from all nations. But there were ads in the United States with children saying, flies don't land on me because I've had my DDT. You remember the era when it used to say a cigarette a day keeps the doctor away. Well, this is about DDT. Flies won't land on me because I've had my DDT. Now it's a dirty dozen. So when people say, what's that got to do with polio? The incidence of polio, if you graph it, and the incidence of the use of DDT, polio was 6 months behind the incidence of DDT. So when you would see DDT levels peaking, you would see polio peak 6 months later. Then you'd see DDT usage dropping, you'd see polio 6 months later drop. This is a very interesting observation. I don't know whether that means that DDT was causing it, but certainly smallpox vaccine was not the reason that smallpox was eradicated. I believe it was because we stopped using DDT. So this is a political thing, but when it comes down to the aspect of vaccinations, people say, Dr. Buttar, you're an anti-vaxxer. I am not anti-vaccine, I'm anti-stupidity. Because if there was a vaccine that didn't have all those preservatives in there that are highly toxic, like mercury and formaldehyde and nickel, and didn't have the DNA adducts that are added to increase a reaction, if they didn't have various human cell lines, mutated human cell lines, DNA from other species like dogs and monkeys with other viral loads in there, if they didn't have all those things in there and they actually were given at a time when a child could seroconvert, because we give these vaccines on the first day of the planet, yet a child's immune system can't even seroconvert, can't even mount an immune response till 6 months to a year of age. So now we've got all these components, and then using things like mercury, the body can't even eliminate it till the alimentary system is fully developed, which takes about a year for the alimentary tract to develop. If they made a vaccine that didn't have DNA adducts, didn't have mutated human cell lines, didn't have adjuvants, didn't have mercury, nickel, formaldehyde, and other contaminants and other things that are dangerous that suppress the immune system, didn't have glyphosate, which now they have glyphosate in there, they have Roundup, the weed killer in vaccines. If they didn't have all that stuff in there, and it would actually given at a time when a child could actually seroconvert, like at a year and a half of age, and it didn't cause any harm, I would be all for it. I would be totally for it. We have over 7,400 doctors that have reached out over the last month. So we weren't able to get everybody on here, and people are busy and scheduled. So I believe that there's thousands and thousands of doctors worldwide that feel this way. They're just not being represented because the media is definitely trying to prevent this information from getting out. There's a lot of people that feel this and understand this. So it's one of those incredible moments when we start realizing that we are the vast majority, but because we're being singled out, because we're not getting a voice or a fair voice, it is being prevented. The information is being prevented from being disseminated to the world so that the question can be asked, why is this happening? let's ask the millions of people out there that may be seeing this, why would anybody censor facts and truth about injury that's been caused by something that has been promoted for the last 20 or 30 years as the single most important safety component for our children, yet has caused more injuries, more documented injuries, millions of children being maimed worldwide? Why would you want to stop the conversation? That's the first question. And I'll give you a couple of reasons, but I think that's the first question that we have to ask. So I didn't realize this, and I think I know quite a bit about vaccinations, but I didn't realize this till I saw a presentation from my friend, Bobby Kennedy, who you had on recently, and actually Dell and a couple of other people have also talked about this, that in the 1980s, the vaccine industry came to Congress and said, we need help. We need to be bailed out, just like the real estate, the savings and loan crisis and the automotive crisis. The vaccine industry came in the 1980s and asked for a bailout. And the reason they needed a bailout was because of the number of people that were being injured by vaccines. And President Reagan at the time said this is not a good idea, but Congress went ahead and bailed them out. And the reason that they gave was, we have so many lawsuits, we cannot make vaccines. We cannot afford to be in business. So the government bailed them out, and the government then took over the oversight with a mandate that every 2 years they would do safety studies on different vaccines. Up to this point, 2020, now we're talking about 40, 50 years later, because this was like in the 70s and the 80s, let's just say in the last 40 years. Guess how many safety studies have been done by the US government to assess the efficacy and safety of vaccines? I'll save you some time. 0. So the mandate that the government took over to do oversight has been totally ignored. Now, and it's not that they did it on purpose. I think they just, like the government, they dropped the ball. Now, how would you like to have a business where you can have no liability, and it doesn't matter how many people that you hurt, but there's no liability? Because now, let's say that I filed a lawsuit against a vaccine manufacturer. Guess who the defendant is on that lawsuit when it's filed with the government? The defendant is not that vaccine manufacturer, it's HHS, it's the Health and Human Services, it's the US government that you're suing because of a vaccine injury. And guess who's defending the US government? The Department of Justice. And remember, the Department of Justice is supposed to be making sure that justice is being done. Instead, they are fighting to defend the Health and Human Services from somebody who's been injured. Now, does that make any sense whatsoever? That we are having to fight our own government because we've been injured by something that they've mandated that's being made by a company or companies that are vested in making unbelievable, god-awful amounts of money with no liability. So they can make garbage, they can inject horse manure into us, and they have no liability. Those of you that are on here, you have no idea the level of gratitude that I have for you. You have no idea. Because of you and everyone else like you, our humanity will survive. And this is the reason that when people give me accolades, it's not about me, guys. I don't care about any of those accolades. I care about my kids. And I care about your kids, and I care about all the future kids, because we're talking about the future of the human race. And what they're doing is committing the greatest atrocity, the greatest crime against mankind that has ever been committed. And if we allow them to get away with it, it will be the end of recorded history as we know it. We are talking about a mass extinction level event here that's potentially coming down the pipeline. And it may have been the ice age before, it may have been something else, but this is going to be because of the stupidity of the human species. So we have to rise up right now. We have to do it. It's not about our survival. I don't care whether, Brian, you live or I live. I don't care about that. If somebody said that you could end this right now and give your life, I would do it in a flash. And I bet you that the vast majority, if not every one of these doctors on here, would do the same thing so that the world can continue to move forward the way it's supposed to. We have to make this change now. We have to wake up. We have to realize what's happening, because the planet's survival, literally the human species survival, is at stake.